Chapter 15. Keith grabbed the phone on the third ring. "This is Keith." "Hey, dude, are you not picking up your messages again? What is up with you and not returning my calls? You're going to give me a complex if you don't watch it," Greg said with a laugh. "Not my fault. Some of us have to work," Keith said, shifting his cell phone to his other ear as he hauled a slab of hay through the stables to Dragnet's stall. "What are you up to?" "Numbers, clients, problems. Same as always. You?" "Horses, hay, problems. Same as always." He threw the hay over the gate and stopped only a second to pat the horse. "Haven't heard from you in a while." "Aren't you lucky?" "Hey, you said it, not me." "I guess you got Dallas to the airport and back home in one piece." "You know me, Mr. Responsibility," Keith said, dragging 2 more slabs off the bale of hay. "Seems that part comes and goes as I remember." "Oh, uh-huh. Hello, Pot. This is the kettle calling." He slung those slabs over the gate to Buck. "Well, you may have a point there," Greg said. "Considering I got driven home the other night, that might not be too far from the truth." "Driven home? When?" "The other night," Greg said, as if Keith already knew. "After your party." Keith stopped and leaned against the graying wood of the stables. He took his hat off and wiped his forehead. "After the party? What are you talking about? Who drove you home?" There was a pause. "Well, if you must know, Maggie took me home." Even the hat stopped. "Maggie?" A picture of her lying in the afternoon sun traced through him. "Why did Maggie take you home?" "I don't know. She didn't trust me to drive, I guess." "She took you all the way into Houston?" Panic rose in him with each question. "That's where my home is." "I know that. Why did you make her drive you back? If you didn't think you could drive, you should have asked me." "Hey, dude, I didn't make the decision. She did. And believe me, I wasn't going to go back up to your door and ask you to take me at that point." Keith thought back to that night, trying to remember if Greg had been that bad off. Surely he would have noticed if he was. Then the thought occurred to him that Greg was taking Maggie home at the time. If he was that bad, and Keith let her get in that car? Then another thought occurred to him. Wait a minute. How'd she get home? "We called her a cab. She wouldn't take no for an answer." "But it had to have been, what, midnight or better when she got home?" "That's what I kept trying to tell her, but I'm telling you that lady's got a will of steel." That much Keith knew. "I think I'm going to ask her to our company picnic," Greg said. "Oh, when's that?" Keith asked, as if he was still breathing. "Saturday after next, the 15th. I hope she'll come. We really had a good time together the other night." Keith thought asking the next question just might kill him. "So you haven't asked her yet?" "No, we talked the other night until like midnight, but it was just general stuff. My work, her work, college." This conversation was making Keith nauseous. "Listen, man, I've got to get back to work, or Ike's going to skin me alive when he gets back tomorrow." "'Kay, but don't be a stranger." "I couldn't get any stranger, could I?" "Hey," Greg laughed, "you said it, not me." They signed off, but it took Keith a full minute to get his body to move again. Greg was going to ask her out again. That was bad news. They had talked until midnight. That was very bad news. Well, it was good news, but as good as it should have been, it hurt like everything. And then there was the whole issue of her taking Greg home. What did they do when they got to his place? Keith knocked that thought away with a solid thwack. He didn't want to hate Greg. Greg had been there through some of the toughest times of Keith's life. But how do you watch the woman you are falling in love with walk off into the sunset with a man who has been your best friend for 15 years? They were questions with no answers. Finally, with no better option, Keith pried himself from the wall. There was work to be done. That was the only thing that didn't seem to be complicated anymore. Keith was sprawled out next to the jack on the spare trailer Tuesday afternoon, fixing another flat with a patched tire. At the rate they were going, they could outfit NASCAR with all the tires he'd changed in the last month. He needed to go in and get some new ones. He needed to get the track watered down. He needed to feed the horses. Truth was, he needed help because he was about to crack trying to do it on his own. "Well, it looks like the operation hasn't completely fallen apart," Ike said, putting his cowboy boot on the trailer's running board as Keith fitted the repaired tire on and spun the lug nuts. "Not on my watch." Keith yanked himself to his feet, rubbing the dirt from his hands with a rag. The dirt didn't move much, and he replaced the rag in his back pocket. He grabbed the wrench. "We've got to budget for some new tires. These are about to kill me." "Put in a request," Ike said. "I'll take it up with the manager." Keith stalked by him back to the tire. "I just did." "Aren't you going to ask how we did?" "Fifth," Keith said. "I can read, you know." "Gee, you're in a good mood." "Huh. I wouldn't know why. You leave me here with 6,000 things to do and no help." "Hey, Mr. Ayer, how's it going?" Tanner asked, stepping up. "It would be better if I had some help with this tire." "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Here, I'll get these." Tanner bent down and started twisting on the lug nuts. "See, that's what I mean," Keith said, indicating Tanner. "You should hire 4 more of him." "Put in a request." Keith glared at him. "I just did." Maggie hadn't heard a word from Keith since he dropped them off on Sunday. She knew that was for the best, but it didn't feel like it was. Thursday night, Inez knocked at her door after the kids were asleep. "Phone." Maggie knew who it was, but who it was wasn't who she wanted it to be. She tramped downstairs to the phone. "Hello?" "Hey, Maggie, how's it going?" Just as she thought. "Greg." She dropped onto the chair. "Good. How about you?" "Well, I'll be even better when you say yes." Her head came up from her hand. "Yes, about what?" "About going with me next Saturday." She bit her bottom lip. "Where?" "To my company picnic. They have it every year. We go to the park and eat cold chicken. It's very romantic." "Be still my beating heart." "So you'll go?" Trepidation trounced through her. "I don't know. I'll have to find somebody to babysit." "How about their parents?" She laughed. "Like I said, I'll have to see." They were going to have to quit talking until all hours, Maggie decided Friday morning as she yawned at herself in the mirror. 6 hours of sleep was doing nothing for her sanity. Still, it was nice to have a friend. It was nice of him to listen. The picnic sounded fun, except for the part about leaving the kids, and the part about what he might expect from her afterward. This would be their second official date, and at some point, the laws of dating had to kick in. She thought about asking Keith for his assessment of Greg's intentions. It sounded like it should sound like a good idea. The problem was, it didn't. She didn't want to talk about Greg with Keith, just like she didn't want to talk about Keith with Greg. It was very complicated, and getting more so by the second. "The cavalry has arrived," Keith said, ducking into the playroom at 4 o'clock on Saturday. He'd had to tell Ike he was going into town for supplies. Town and supplies would have to wait. Right now, he had more important things to do. "Oh, hallelujah! I thought you forgot," Maggie said, launching off the carpet. "Me? Forget? Never." He arched his chin. "Come on, let's get out of here while the getting's good." Quickly, Maggie gathered up the pillows and blankets and the 2 little suitcases. Inez knew where she was going. She hadn't really had the guts to tell anyone else. Keith swung Isabella to his hip and took Peter's hand. "Ready?" "Let's do it." Out the door, down the back stairs, through the kitchen that was filled with catering staff, Keith led the way looking like a Mission Impossible operative. Maggie wasn't arguing. If they got caught, there was no telling what might happen. His pickup was parked just outside the tree line on the road. She carried the contraband and threw it into the pickup. Keith wasted no time getting the 2 kids in, and within 2 minutes, they were gone. "Whew," Maggie said, sighing in real relief. "That's a little too much intrigue for my taste." He grinned. "What, you're not planning to join the CIA?" "Unless that stands for the Children in America Fund, no." Before she was even settled, they pulled up at the guest house. He guided the pickup around to the back and parked it in the garage. Then he looked at her. "And now the fun begins." It was a good thing it was a 2-car garage, because the pickup wouldn't have fit in a single-car garage. The garage, though functional, was spotless. Auto equipment on one side, lawn care on the other. Maggie got out of the pickup and pulled Isabella out as well. She stood the little girl on the concrete. Then she collected the overnight things from the front. Keith was already standing at the door to the house. He scooped Isabella up. "Come here, you." She squealed as he put 2 well-placed fingers into her side and tickled her. Then he flipped her over his shoulder, catching her feet. "I brought the potatoes," he said over his shoulder at Maggie. "I hope you brought everything else." Happiness danced through Maggie. He looked so carefree and peaceful, just as he had leaning against the tree at the waterfall. In the kitchen, he swung Isabella to the floor and flipped his hat to the counter. Underneath was the familiar navy bandana. "There's some blocks in the living room I got out, and, for viewing pleasure..." He held up a Nemo DVD. "Oh, here." He reached for the stuff Maggie still had in her arms. "I'll put this down here." She followed him down the hall, admiring how well kept the house was. She hadn't really had much chance to look around on either of her first 2 trips here. Now she took her time, glancing into rooms as they walked. "My office," he said as he passed the first room. "The bathroom. Your room." He smiled at her. "For tonight." At the end of the hall, he turned into the last room. And the kids' room. It wasn't huge, but it was a nice size. Bigger certainly than anything she'd ever slept in until she made it to the mansion. Nice. She walked to the large window overlooking the trees in the direction of the mansion. "It's not the mansion," he said, as if he was apologizing for that. She turned to him. "It doesn't have to be." His gaze fell from her to the things in his hands. "What do we do with these?" "Here." She took them from him and laid them out across the floor next to the window. Peter's stuff and then Isabella's stuff. She had packed clothes for church, too, in case he happened to suggest it. "Here's Peter's blanket. Put that on the bed." She handed over the blue and yellow flannel blanket. "And here's Izzy's." The pink blanket was twined through Isabella's suitcase handle, and it took Maggie an extra tug to get it free. Without really looking at him, she handed it over too. Then she planted her hands on her hips to survey the layout. "I think that's it." He laid the pink blanket out on the carpet. "Cool. What time do you want dinner?" Maggie almost started laughing. "You mean we don't have to be washed and ready 15 minutes early? We won't be inspected? Oh my, I don't know whatever we shall do. We might not know how to act." "They keep you on a pretty tight leash up there, huh?" "That's one way to say it." She stepped past him out the door. "Those 2 will never know how to make a decision for themselves. Everything is planned down to the second. It's crazy." At the living room end of the hallway, she stepped to the side to let him lead. Although she'd expected him to go to the kitchen, he walked to the living room where Peter and Isabella were playing quietly. "Let's see who can build the biggest tower," Keith said excitedly, joining in the fun on the floor. "Pete, you and me against Maggie and Izzy. Ready?" Maggie barely made it onto the carpet without crashing. "Hey now, you've got to give us a chance." "Oh yeah?" Keith's gaze danced at her. "Go." Maggie laughed as she grabbed blocks from the center of the floor. He was the most alive person she had ever been around, and life with him present was filled with it. 2 hours later, they stood in the kitchen together. Taco meat sizzled in the skillet as he moved around the kitchen that couldn't be called small, except his presence made it feel that way. It was strange, because he wasn't tall and he wasn't even all that big, but he was solid. Solid shoulders, solid thighs, solid arms, solid in body and heart. And his presence had a way of filling every room he entered. "Tacos and carrots," Maggie said as she stood at the stove, stirring the food in the pans. "What a combination." "I didn't think Iz could eat the shells," he said, as if once again he was apologizing. "Hey," Maggie said over her shoulder. "I was teasing. You did good." He seemed to soak the compliment in. "I got some extra spicy and some mild for the tacos. I didn't know what you liked." "Mild. You put extra spicy in that stuff, and I'll have smoke coming out of my ears." His smile lit his face. "That could be interesting." "Says you." She pulled her wrist up. It was almost 6:30. "We're going to have to hurry. Those two are going to really get thrown off schedule." He split the meat into 2 pans and put the contents of the 2 packages in, stirring each as he did so. "Oh, that would be such a tragedy." She laughed. "It's okay. I'll just blame you." Stirring slowly, he shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time." At first, she thought he was slamming himself, but when she looked at him, his wink made her remember when he really had been blamed for something she did. The timer on the stove went off. "Here, back up. The shells are ready." He put an oven mitt on his hand to get the cookie sheet out. She shook her head, fighting not to laugh. When the cookie sheet was on the pot holder on the cabinet, he turned and caught her expression. "What?" "You. Is there anything you can't do? You cook, you throw parties, you clean yogurt off of curtains." "I'm a man of many talents." "I can see that." "Is that ready?" "As it'll ever be." "Dinner time." When the food and plates had been transferred to the table, and Peter and Izzy were settled in their seats, Keith sat down and watched Maggie sit across from him. There was no describing that feeling. It filled him all the way to the top with a happiness and a peace he couldn't remember ever feeling. It was so different than sitting here with Dallas. That felt empty and awkward. This felt real, more real than anything he'd ever experienced. "Maggie," he said, watching her. She smiled at him and held her hands out to the children on either side of her. 2 little hands in hers, 2 in his, and she bent her head. "Dear Father in heaven, we praise you for all the wonderful things you have graciously put into our lives. Help us never to take them for granted. We love you, and we praise you. Amen." His amen was husky. It was just so hard to get enough air in for the words to sound normal. Reaching across the table, he picked up Peter's plate and started filling it as she filled Izzy's. "So," he had to clear his throat to get more out, "are we going to church tomorrow?" She was intently filling the plate and didn't so much as glance at him. "I brought their clothes, and I told Inez we might." So she'd thought they might as well. Something about that sent his spirit soaring. If this could just all be for real, that was the one and only thing that could make this feeling any better. A movie, popcorn in the living room. It was like the life Maggie had always dreamed of having, but never thought would come. The kids sat on the floor in front of the television. Maggie sat on one side of the couch, and Keith sat on the other. "I didn't know you were a Nemo fan," she said teasingly. "I told you I'm a man of many talents." "Cool. I think I'll bring Barney over on Monday." He smiled as he put a now shower-cleaned arm over the couch back. She did the dishes, he took a shower. It all felt so normal. The only thing she would have asked now was that he could be sitting beside her with that arm around her. Something told her that would feel even better than this did. "I don't know. I might draw the line at Barney." "I don't blame you. He even gets on my nerves." Shh, Peter said. The movie's starting. Keith laughed softly. Shh, he mouthed to her. Behave. Me? She mouthed back. You behave. I didn't start it. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm going to finish it if you don't watch it. He raised his eyebrows. You're getting very brave. Why did he have to look so handsome? It was getting harder and harder to keep her heart from going on little trips with her in his arms as the world slipped by. She grabbed a pillow, anchored it to her chest, and pointed at the television. Watch the movie and behave yourself. The only good thing that could be said about the bathroom by the time bath time was almost over was that water could be cleaned. The floor was covered in it. Maggie, too, was covered in suds and water from Izzy splashing bubbles and rubbing them all over the white and gray marble tub sides. By the time Keith brought Peter in, the bathroom was awash in water and suds. You look like a scrubbing bubble, Keith told her, scraping a small handful of suds from her hair. It's not my fault, she said as Izzy started pounding on the water again, sending suds in 70 directions at once. Maggie tried to wipe them off her face with her sleeve, but it was unclear how successful she was. Ugh, come on, stop that. I take it the bubble bath was a hit, he said from his position on the floor, where he was removing Peter's clothing. You could say that. Once again, Izzy started squealing and whacking the water. Suds flew in all directions. Grr, okay, that's enough fun for one night. Maggie stood and grabbed a towel. However, still sitting in the tub, the child was covered with suds from every angle. Oh, great. Now, how are we going to get you cleaned off? Here. Keith stood and reached up to release the removable shower head. You pick her up, I'll hose her off. Seeing no better way to do it, Maggie did as instructed. Okay, but you be careful with that. He grinned. Me? I'm always careful. Uh-huh. Yeah, right. Well, you remember that. She lifted Isabella, who was even more slippery from the suds than she normally was. Holding the child up, Maggie shrank back so he wouldn't get her completely soaked as he angled the water at the child. Isabella squealed and kicked. Hey now, you're hard enough to hold on to when you're not doing that. The spray from the hose drizzled up onto Maggie's glasses. Hello, now I can't see. Oh, here, let me fix that. Keith angled the hose around Isabella so that it sprayed Maggie's arm higher, drizzling water all over her. Hey, are you kidding me? I'm not the one taking a bath here. Isabella, Keith said, as if he was mad. You shouldn't get Maggie all wet like that. Isabella squealed and kicked, and on the floor Peter giggled. Maggie's heart lifted at the sound, even as she fought to be mad at him. Finished. Keith shut the water off. He stepped back, but Maggie was still covered with water droplets and holding a dripping, wet, kicking baby. Hello, some help here? Towel, please? He laughed as he pulled the soft taupe towel up from her knees. However, when it was in his hand, he stopped as he looked at them. Who should I dry off, you or her? Let's start with her. Maggie turned, and Keith covered Isabella in the towel. How you ever managed to do this without me every night is beyond me, he said with a wink. Yeah, it's completely unbelievable. But she wasn't mad. She was having the time of her life. She took Isabella, wrapped in the towel, in her arms. Oh, here, you're wet. He put his fingers on either side of her glasses and removed them. I wouldn't know why. She rubbed her face in Izzy's towel. Then she lifted her face for him to replace the glasses. When they were on, he gazed at her. Perfect. The moment froze, and it was as if suddenly she couldn't move. Her breath filled her throat as she gazed into his soft hazel eyes. Move, her brain screamed. But she couldn't. It was as if her body had short-circuited. I'll just go get her ready. Yeah, I'll give Pete a bath. However, neither one of them moved. His eyes held so much that she couldn't get enough of them. Hope, happiness, an offering of a life different than any she had ever lived. Then Isabella kicked in Maggie's arms, and Maggie's attention dropped to her. Okay, let's go. As Maggie walked out, Keith watched her. That was it, her. That's all he ever wanted. Every second he was with her confirmed that fact, and every second he was without her was spent wondering how long it would be before they could be together again. Shaking off the thoughts, he bent down and swept Peter from the carpet. Come here, you. It's your turn.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
This has been Deep in the Heart, written by Staci Stallings. Narrated by Becky Dowdy of Brave Hearts Audiobook Productions. Copyright 2010 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.